as Jen said, my name's Will. I'm the founder of Trigger Point, and we study subconscious. And not only do we study subconscious, but what we do is apply some of these factors I'm going to be talking about in the next couple of minutes into experiences, into messaging, things like that. I want to talk quickly about, first, kind of the genesis of the company and all the things I'm going to be talking about today. So it all started basically about a decade ago, and I was invited to go to the Institute for the Future conference. So has anybody here been to an Institute for the Future conference? Oh, guys, you guys got to go do that. If you ever get the chance to go to something, it doesn't have to be that conference. It can just be a conference that talks about institutes and future. Go do it. Why? Is this was in San Francisco. And the idea is two things are going to happen if you ever get to go to any conference in San Francisco. One, you're going to eat and drink well. So you know that that's going to happen. And then secondly, you're going to get a chance to just chill. Because if you're going to go to like an Institute for the Future conference, they're not going to expect you to go and think. They're going to do the thinking for you. You're just going to absorb the future, right? So I'm running Shopper Insights over at PepsiCo at the time. And I get this invite to go for 4 days over to the Presidio to go do this Institute for the Future. We're going to envision the world, imagine the new world. So I go, absolutely ready to go. I'm pumped up because I like to drink, I like to chill, so I'm going to go do this. And what I didn't expect was about a day into this conference, I learned a term that fundamentally changed everything I knew about research and marketing. I'm going to talk about that today. The term, or the acronym, was called Vuca. Have you ever heard of Vuca? This concept is that the world that is coming, and kind of I could arguably say it was then as well, is going to be more volatile, more uncertain, more chaotic, and a lot of chaos and complexity, and also it's going to be ambiguous. Sounds kind of familiar, right? This is a decade ago. And because of that, and really it's because of technology, they were sitting there about a decade ago thinking, all this technology is going to come where anybody can talk to anyone, anywhere in the world at any time. And so I'm sitting with a bunch of brand managers, like 70 people. And the brand managers in the room are loving this, right? Because now they have the ability to go and rather than just think about a TV ad campaign and trying to do a 360 marketing campaign around it, they now have tons of breadth. They can now go take their message to the exact person at the right time. So they're seeing the future and they're like, man, I get incredible reach with my messaging. I'm looking at it from a kind of a different perspective because I'm thinking to myself, the world is already complex and now we've eliminated all barriers to everybody in the world being able to come in and access through messaging, right? So technology is going to make the world even more complex, right? So we live in a very, very complex world. And now with the advent of technology, we can now say that any kid in Indonesia can wake up in the morning, start a business, set up an ad, place that ad on my feed, all before he has his first cup of coffee. That's the world we live in now. So we have all this complexity, tons of messaging. There's estimates that say you see 1,000, 2,000 messages a day. Others are hundreds. I don't really know the number. I will tell you it's a lot, and it keeps getting bigger. Just down the street, the local Chick-fil-A is messaging me on my social media to come in. Like, that's just one business. Now, the entire world has the ability to message to me on any given day. So, what have we done? In kind of to deal with all this complexity, the human mind has adapted. What we have is a very sophisticated psychological filter that estimates are saying that we're filtering well over 99% of all messages that come to us, right? And not only are those being messaged, or those messages being filtered, but you're really only consciously considering a fraction of those. So the vast, vast, vast majority of all messages are never reaching the conscious mind. So understanding this filter and how messages kind of go through into this filter and what comes into the filter and what makes it through that filter is really, really important thing for us to go figure out. Because without that, we have tons of messages and not a lot of kind of engagement. So if you want to understand why people do what they do, you're going to understand 4 different social kind of factors or psychological factors. I'm going to go through these in a little bit of detail for you guys. The first one is, if you want to understand why people do what they do, understand their goals, right? Tally actually said this yesterday, understanding what people want, basic goal theory, right? The idea behind goals is that without a goal, your movements are very erratic. You don't know which direction to take a behavior, right? Goal theory helps to figure out which behavior or which goal you're going to go after. So there are 2 types of goals. There are functional goals. Those are things that people say when you say, what do you want? Well, I want to save time. I want to save money. I want this to be easy, very functional in nature. Great. Then what we have is something called higher order goals. And higher order goals are those reasons on why that's important. So Talia, you talked about laddering it, to say why. Higher order goals are where we get the first taste of emotion, right? So why is it important to save money? Why is it important to save time? You ladder that 2 or 3 times by asking why, you get to something that's called a little more emotional, something in the space of a higher order. Really important to understand that. That's basic goal theory. Been doing that forever, and you guys have been doing that too. So that's nothing actually probably all that new to most people. But without understanding somebody's goals, you don't know how to move the behavior. You have to know their goals. So once I understand kind of what you want, the next thing you got to do is understand why do you want it. That's basic motivational psychology. So what's been great in the last decade with motivational psychology is that there's been this like kind of movement to take all these different schools of thought and bring them together into one, kind of a mechanism or a path to know, kind of summarizing all this motivational psychology. What it comes down to, there are 9 core human motivations that drive the vast majority of human behavior. So one would be very Maslow, right? Security, our desire for protection, right? Very Maslow. And safety. Another one would be achievement, right? So some people are driven to overcome barriers to be their best, right? Kind of think of Olympic athletes. Autonomy is another one, where a lot of HR groups in corporate America are trying to give more freedom. Some people desire freedom. Another one is empowerment, which is the desire for control over our environments. So there's 9 of these things. You don't have to worry about it right now, but the idea would be if I can identify what motivates you to go after your goal, what motivates you to go after your goal, whether you want to be an achiever, whether you want more security, whether you want to have more autonomy in your life, that's really important because motivation is the engine that drives people to go after their goals. Without a motivation, you don't really move, right? You have goals, but you don't take any action. So if I understand what you want and why you want it, the next thing you want to understand is how do people approach it? There's this concept called regulatory fit theory. It's out of Columbia University. A guy by the name of Torrey Higgins has been doing this for about 30 years. And the concept is this. Actually, Nir talked a little bit about it yesterday. The idea is that we all go after our goals in 1 of 2 ways. One way is through a promotion regulatory lens, meaning when we go after our goals, we are seeking to maximize gains. So if you're in this state of mind, you will look at brands, you will look and seek for messages, you will look for strategies that tell you that if you take this path, you are more likely to reach that goal. You are going to maximize your chances of reaching that goal, right? You could have the exact same motivation, the exact same goal. Another person will use what's called a prevention regulatory lens. So in this lens, they're going to seek to minimize risk and try to eliminate barriers, eliminate pain, if you will. So they're going to look for messages, brands, strategies that are telling them that if I take this path, now I am more likely to reach my goal because I'm going to eliminate any barriers. Sounds like a small nuance, guys. When it comes to the visuals and the words that you use in your messaging, it matters a lot because you will frame your brand slightly differently. So let me give you an example. We do a lot of research around food. And if you ask a middle-aged guy, what do they want? Functional goal. Almost all middle-aged guys say, I want to lose weight. Got it. Me too. Why? Why is that important? They always come to the same thing, especially, or obviously, always when they have daughters. They'll say, I want to be around for when my daughter has her wedding. Every guy wants to walk their daughter down the aisle. So we hear that again and again. So we ladder that. Why is it important to lose weight? Boom. It's to walk my daughter. That tells me that they're under the nurturance motivation, so seeking desire of love. Some guys will look at that first, that pathway, through a prevention lens, meaning they will seek to minimize bad eating. So I'm not going to go eat at a fast food place. I'm going to eliminate trans fats and calories, right? Other guys will look at that same goal through a promotion lens. I'm going to eat healthier. I'm going to eat healthier. I'm going to exercise more. Same goal, same motivation, different pathways. So you can frame up your brand slightly differently based upon what approach they're using. So that's just basic regulatory fit theory. So you have goals, what do you want? Motivations, why do you want it? Next, understanding how do you approach it? Lastly, how do people decide? This cognitive heuristics. There's a lot of space around behavioral economics. It's behavioral economics 101. The idea here is that we all have these heuristics, these kind of rules of thumb that help you make decisions very easily. So one of the basic ones that we've heard a lot here is scarcity effect, right? This idea is that when we believe things are scarce in nature, we assign more value to that, right? So limited time only, while supplies last, that makes it very easy for somebody like me who, rather than doing cost-benefit analyses of whether is it really limited, do I like this brand or not, if it's limited time only, I may just go ahead and hit it. Like Amazon uses this all the time. Airlines use this stuff all the time as well. So the idea is that there's these decision shortcuts. So if I understand now what your goals are, functional higher order, I understand one of the 9 motivations, maybe 2 motivations, that are driving you to go after that goal. How do you approach it? And then maybe a trigger, a cognitive heuristic. And if I know those things, well, you may be asking, okay, great, so why? Who cares? Like, they're great insights, but why do I care? Because if I know what you want, why you want it, how to approach it, and then how you decide, I can now put this, I can integrate these facts into messaging, into an experience, into an app, into a website, and I can activate why you want that goal. I can remind you that that goal is important to you. I can prime why you want it. I can frame how you should naturally approach it that feels intuitive, and ultimately trigger an action. And here's why you do this. Because when you do this into good marketing, whatever you want to define as good marketing, it's on brand, it's on story, whatever it is, if you do this, you should be more likely to increase what's called emotional arousal, or psychologically, it's called a hot state. So it's the idea when you go to Vegas, you're in a hot state, and you're like very susceptible to influence, like that is the science behind emotional marketing. So my goal is to understand these 4 factors to identify how do I create this emotional hot state, emotional arousal. And if I do that, you're much more susceptible to influence, right? So it's very important to understand a mind state. So a mind state are these temporary moments of high emotional arousal. How do you create these things? Psychologically, we call these things hot states. And when you're in a hot state, you're much more susceptible to influence. So mind states are the science behind emotional marketing. So when we talk about let's get emotional, let's just kind of realize that there is science behind emotions. It's called motivational psychology, and some others as well. But there's science behind emotions. And you shouldn't just use emotions kind of nilly-willy, is that a word here? Like you shouldn't just kind of incorporate an emotion. There's science behind which emotion to put into which situation. So what's great about mind state messaging is it messages to the heart, the emotional side, but also to the rational side, because we post-rationalize everything. We still have budgets. We still have to feel good about our decisions. So this type of messaging heads to the heart as well as to the mind. Each of these mind states has a very unique behavioral design strategy and tactics that you would go and use. And ultimately, the idea is this, is to move this idea from a marketer, where our job is only build brand preference, to actually becoming a behavioral designer, and this concept of driving choice, using psychology and behavioral design to drive choices in our favor. So, what is behavioral design? Applied behavioral design is the application of behavioral science to messaging and product development to change behaviors and other important problems. It is one element of the larger discipline of behavioral analysis, which consists of a lot of words that I don't want to talk about right now. So rather than that, everybody pull out your phones or your computer and bring up a browser, any browser you use. I want you to type in the word, let's do watches. And look at the images for me. Pull up images and just start scrolling. You guys done that? What do you see that's common? If you guys don't want to deal with it, I put a couple pictures here for you. What do you guys see that's common in those pictures? Watches? Yeah. Awesome. The time. What is the time? 10:10. 10:10. Keep scrolling. 10:09:36 a lot of times. 10:09:36. Why is that? Why is that? Any ideas? What'd you say? Coffee break. That's a new one. I haven't heard that one. I like that one. Why would it be 10:09? Any other ideas? It frames the logo. I like that one. Cool. Another idea? What's the arrow pointing down? What would that do? Make them click. Man, I love, this is a brand new conference for me, and I've never heard that one either. That's 2. That's awesome. All right. It's smiling. I've heard that one. I actually heard this one too, that it's actually an homage to when President Lincoln was shot, right? And that's why. Or somebody actually, I was at a school not too long ago, and they said, well, this is when World War II, the treaty was signed at 10:09:36. So here's the idea. I don't know. I don't think really anybody knows. But the guy who should know is the CMO at Zales. which is a large jewelry chain in the US. So I know the guy. So I said, Scott, I pulled out the brochure, we went to his office and said, tell me why. Why is that even in your brochures, watches say 100936? And he did the same thing what you just said over here about, it frames up the brand, except that sometimes it cuts the brand in half. I don't have a picture here, but sometimes the brand's not in the middle. And so finally, he's Brit, and he says, well, William, I don't know why. It just has always been like that, right? So if you're a cognitive neuroscientist, you may come to this conclusion, and it all starts back in 1920 with the Hamilton Watch Company. So here's the concept. Here's the story. The story is that back in 1920, there's a clerk that's inside of a store that sells Hamilton watches, and he's sitting there always trying to have to set the time. So he starts playing with it. And he sets it's different times, and eventually he comes to the conclusion that when things are set to 10:09 or 10:10, there's a spike in sales, right? And then word gets out. So in the 1930s, you start seeing Waltham starts doing the same thing in their print ads. And then in the 1940s, you have Omega, 1970s, Swatch Watch. I was a Swatch Watch kid in the 90s. And even today, 100936. Guys, that picture of the clocks I took this summer in a Walmart in Knoxville, Tennessee. Do you know how hard it is for somebody to set all those clocks to 100936? Like, that's like deliberate. Like, why is that, right? Somebody's actually like taking a lot of work to do something like that. So if you're a cognitive neuropsychologist or in that space, it may be explained from this term called oblique orientations. And oblique orientations are that the human mind or the human eye picks up things, well, it's actually oblique versus cardinal orientations. So cardinal orientations are things that have sharp corners. Stage here. The human eye picks up on cardinal orientations faster than oblique orientations, which are more curves, right? Because in nature and in the world, we have lots of curves. So your mind picks up and your human eye picks up sharp angles faster. So why would that, who cares, right? So what does that have to do with watch sales in the 1920s? What happens if you're walking by your watch store and you got your kind of cool top hat and you're going with your cane, you're walking down the thing, and all of a sudden you look and you don't see watches set to 12 o'clock. That's very easy to see. 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 12:30. It's just a straight line. You know exactly what time it is. What if you see the smiley face, the oblique orientation, something that's a little off? And what if I could just get 5 people out of 100 who are walking with their top hat to stop and look at a watch? And then if I can just get one conversion out of 100, right? One conversion out of those to come in and just talk about the watch. That's what I want to talk about today. That is behavioral design. What's really cool about behavioral design is that intuitively artists know this stuff. They've known it. This is like where Marc Chagall back in 1910 with his famous clock paintings. It's 10:09, right? There's something intuitive that great designers know intuitively that this is just more interesting. And that's what I want to talk about behavioral design. Behavioral design is incorporating biology, psychology, sociology. If you could take these factors into consideration when you're designing your creative, when you're designing your experiences, then you can just get a little more interest in it. And that's all I need to do to help break through this filter, right? So that's what behavioral design is at its essence. Why should you care? So the power of behaviorally designed experience, there's a couple of great benefits for lots of people. First, you can increase persuasion and buying momentum. So not only is your product or your experience kind of more persuadable and kind of more interesting, but actually you increase buying momentum. Buying momentum it's kind of hard to get somebody to take the first buy, but if I can get you to make one purchase, I can build baskets relatively easy. That's buying momentum. The hard part on buying momentum is directing buying momentum. So I did this one time in a grocery store when I was working for PepsiCo, where I accidentally increased a lot of sales for Coca-Cola, right? So I can get you to buy products. It's very difficult to get you to buy my product. But I kept my job. Next one is happier, more confident decisions. When you buy in this experience, you actually make happier, more confident decisions. That's good because there's less buyer's remorse, less product turn-in, right? So you're not gonna return your product. You actually have more enjoyable experiences, which means grocery stores or you have higher satisfaction ratings for whoever's creating this experience for you, whether it's a website, whatever. Interesting, there's a study in '96 that talked about there's an increased understanding of the technology, especially technology. So when you buy in this kind of heightened emotional arousal, you actually believe you understand the technology more. Why that's important is if you think you understand the technology more, you're more likely to engage with it. If you're more likely to engage with it, you're more likely to experience the entire all the benefits. So my mom has an iPhone, and she uses like 7% of all the capability of an iPhone. She uses it for FaceTime, and she texts me, and I think she uses it for her Kindle as well, right? She doesn't know the world that this thing can bring her. But if you engage with it, you're more likely to get those benefits. And lastly, there's an increased perceived value. You can charge more. People will pay more when something feels naturally intuitive. It just kind of feels natural into their subconscious. And if you're in marketing, if you want more effective messaging, it tells you increased breakthrough, because if something's been designed this way, it filters through. It's more likely anyways to filter through this filter. Increase engagement with your advertising. They'll interact with your advertising more. Increase understandability. They will believe they understand the message behind your messaging. Increase memorability. You're more likely to get into long-term memory. And then lastly, increase trust and believability of the message. But if I take a brand and place it next to those proof points, RTBs, whatever you want to call them, there's sometimes a halo effect where it halos, that trust and believability will halo over to the brand. So there's a lot of great benefits of designing or thinking about mind states in this moment. So how do you get there? Guys, you don't have to worry about this stuff. So here's what I've done. I know you guys want to eat and drink and chill. I get it. So you don't have to worry about taking notes on this stuff. We've actually emailed everybody in the room an email that attaches a workbook. And in this workbook, it's going to tell you step by step. Like step number 1, think about somebody's goals. Here are the types of questions you should be able to answer. You can answer them yourselves, or maybe you have to do research. I don't know. But it's going to tell you step by step on how to identify one of these mind states. Then there's going to be a link in that email that you go to download a behavioral activation brief. And a behavioral activation brief, in fact, we're going to give all 18 of them to you. And the idea is you can download them, and it'll tell you kind of over the course of 10 or 11 different slides how to think about this mind state and craft your messaging at the strategic level, all the way down to tactics, like things like dilate the pupils of the lead model in the advertisement, because I want to create a sense of reciprocity. So it can kind of give you some really strong tactics to move forward with, and then from there, you just make it your own. You make it on brand. You make it for your experience. And so you take all the best of what you're trying to do, which is build brand preference, use behavioral psychology and design to drive choice. And I think you get to an optimized piece of messaging. So it should be in your email. So let me give you a quick case study of when we used this process recently for a financial services client, how we kind of optimized their email for a really nice lift in conversion. So the industry is financial planning and wealth management, major financial services company. And what they want to do is at the end of the year, when people who have kind of maybe in middle management or above, you may get an end of year bonus. And the problem when we get end of year bonuses, we spend the hell out of that thing. We don't ever bring it back into them, and we don't put it into the bank. We spend it. So their idea is we want at least a little bit of that bonus to come into your 401k, your IRA, into a mutual fund or something. So the behavioral problem to solve was we just want something that'll get them to call their financial advisor so we can talk to them about their bonus and maybe hopefully get a little bit of that bonus into one of our accounts, right? So the first thing we do when we do one of these analyses is we want to do what's called a behavioral audit. And all we do then is, oh, actually, before I tell you that, let me tell you about mind states. So when you think about finance, this is how finances work for most people. Remember at the very top over here, we have different motivations. So when you're new in your career, think about it this way. You're oftentimes really driven by security. You're like, I don't want to lose my money. I'm really budget constrained. I got to make my rent or whatever. So people actually, when they're younger in their careers or earlier in their careers, they tend to be more security driven and prevention. They seek to minimize loss, right? But then what happens as wealth builds, you move into this more optimistic achievement state. So let's think of it as your middle management. You're starting to make a little bit of money. You actually starting to invest on your own. And then all of a sudden you're about maximizing your wealth at this point. So you start kind of moving up into this achievement space. And then once you enter into a space where you have, your kind of retirement kind of set up, or you're close to retiring, maybe your kids are out in college, you actually start moving into this empowerment stage where you're not trying to maximize your wealth, you're really trying to take control over your money. And you're trying to make sure that you can use that money for many different purposes, whether it's for your kids or you want to give over to a charity or whatever, but you seek to control and maximize your control, right? So there are different mind states that people go through by life stage. So if you knew this going into it, what we do is we looked at their emails. So here's the idea. This company has been sending out emails, and the way they do it is there's actually this newsletter, and then their brokers can actually go to this content site. So they have a third party who brings out this content, and they basically go and they look for content that they believe would be really useful. to their customers. So we did a behavioral audit, and just off the beginning, I can look at this just from a motivational psychology perspective and say, there's a lot of competence primes. If you see how to, why you, when you ask people questions, that's actually around the competence. There's this idea around competence is that people seek to maximize their understanding of something. That's a motivation that some people have. So in this case, they're using competence motivations. They're priming competence in their copy, but yet we just said they should be priming for achievement and empowerment, right? So right off the bat, I'm thinking there's something off on just those words because you're already off of the mind state that we kind of identified. And then over here, you're framing both promotion and prevention. They're kind of brought in together. But then we looked at their entire email that got sent us. This example of email, you can imagine the copies on the bottom, the visuals on the top. And what we do is we filter this through artificial intelligence, right, to identify these cues that when you're reading, it's psychologically priming you. So when you do that, we found out that there are words in here that are priming cautious security, that one that's made for the real younger kids, right? And then you have optimistic achiever. These cues are being primed as well. So here's an example of how these things work. When you see, you can still have a little fun, but if you really want to make the most of your windfall, that's priming of security, but that's making a pause. It's basically loss aversion. Or pay down your high interest debt first. Saving, that's by definition a prevention prime. Prepare for a rainy day. So there's a lot of cautious security priming in that, as well as there's some great optimistic achievement priming, like build is promotional prime, build your emergency fund. Consider attacking achievements, about attacking to make your goals, right? So the idea is that there's some great primes here. My problem is that it's cautious security priming, and that's not the right motivational mind state to go after, right? Remember, we wanted to go after optimistic empowerment. So here's what we did. Same basic copy. We took out the red kind of cautious security priming and instead integrated these blue things like gain more control over debt. Same idea. But remember, that's what the people in this life stage are looking for. They're looking to gain control. That's empowerment. Or take control. Somebody who seeks empowerment seeks for control again, right? So take control over your financial risk with your wealth advisor. This brings in a little bit of your wealth advisor gives you control. So basically, most of the copy is fine, but by just kind of changing slightly words and kind of putting this overlay, we had between a 2x and a 4x overall conversion on that. On our best day, it was a 4. On our worst, we had a 2x conversion. Just by simply knowing the mind state that somebody's under and then architecting choice in that way, creating visuals, creating copy that can kind of integrate into that subconscious, right? Ultimately, what I want to leave here with is that there's science behind design. It's both. It's like the greatest marriage is when you get great artists and great design and integrate that with science. And I think that's where top-line growth, what we're being asked to do is drive top-line growth. And there's this whole world around behavioral science that helps you understand how to do that. So I say that, that growth rests in our ability to understand, but also design for behavioral change. So with that, check your email inbox. In that, remember, you're going to get a workbook that could walk you step by step on how to identify a mind state, and then it's going to link you back to where you can download all 18 of these creative briefs that'll tell you how to activate in that mind state. And with that, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.